Today's reading is taken from Psalm 145. I will exalt you, O God my King, and bless your name forever and ever. Every day will I bless you, and praise your name forever and ever. Great is the Lord, and highly to be praised. His greatness is beyond all searching out. One generation shall praise your works to another, and declare your mighty acts. They shall speak of the majesty of your glory, and I will tell of all your wonderful deeds. They shall speak of the might of your marvelous acts, and I will also tell of your greatness. They shall pour forth the story of your abundant kindness, and joyfully sing of your righteousness. The Lord is gracious and merciful, and his mercy is over all his creatures. All your works praise you, O Lord, and your faithful servants bless you. They tell of the glory of your kingdom and speak of your mighty power, to make known to all people your mighty acts and the glorious splendor of your kingdom. Your kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. Your dominion endures throughout all ages. The Lord is sure in all his words and faithful in all his deeds. The Lord upholds all those who fall and lifts up all those who are bowed down. The eyes of all wait upon you, O Lord, and you give them their food in due season. You open wide your hand and fill all things living with plenty. The Lord is righteous in all his ways and loving in all his works. The Lord is near to all those who call upon him, to all who call upon him faithfully. He fulfills the desires of those who fear him. He hears their cry and saves them. The Lord watches over those who love him, but all the wicked he shall destroy. My mouth shall speak the praise of the Lord, and let all flesh bless his holy name forever and ever.
Well, hello everyone. It's Wednesday and time to catch up once again with you all. I hope your week's going okay and continue to know God's blessing in your life and in these continually strange and weird times. I know some people, I know we say this a lot, but some is finding it easier than others, some more challenging than others. It's been going on a little while now, so I guess emotions and feelings and sense of loss, sense of separation, really starting to bite. But trust that you'll know God's peace and God's blessing in all that you're doing. Just again to say that we'd love to see more of your lockdown pictures. We're hoping to put these together in a kind of a video montage at some point if we can get enough. So please take a picture of your household, who's there, Mike and Anne we've got today. It would be just lovely to see some pictures and to be reminded of one another, to encourage one another, to pray for one another. Also, as you'll see, Sherwyn's reading the Bible passage today, and we're always keen to have more voices from across the congregation participating in these emails and reading Bible passages. But also, if there's Jonathan shared today about his favourite Bible verse, we would love to. Might be a Bible verse that's always meant a lot to you, Bible verse that particularly, or a passage that's particularly being helpful for you at this time. Sometimes passages jump out and strange times, testing times, and so if you've got a particular passage that's meant a lot to you, want to send 100 words why it's really blessed you, that would be great to send that in as well. And just a top secret heads up. Just continue to pray for Michelle. Michelle joins us as much as she can at different times, down from UCB up in Stoke. And but anyway, pray for her because it's a birthday on Monday, and we don't always single out particular birthdays unless it's a significant birthday. I will say no more than that. But obviously, it's not going to be quite the celebration that Michelle had anticipated to celebrate her birthday. So do remember her and to pray for her in the coming days as she celebrates her birthday on Monday. I don't know how you've been filling your time. Some people obviously working from home, parents homeschooling. That certainly fills the time up. Obviously, there's a lot more time perhaps to watch television. One of the things I've done on Saturday, I try and have a complete day off, and the last few Saturdays I got up reasonably early, so I put a movie on and watch a film, which I haven't done for quite a long time. Feels quite decadent. But the other thing that has become a bit of a pattern, which probably says something about my age, is I've suddenly found myself or ourselves watching on Sunday evening Country File, followed by Antiques Roadshow, and disturbingly addicted to both the shows, particularly Country File. And alongside Country File is also on BBC Two at 6:30 at the moment, most evenings. There's a programme called The Farmer's Country. And both Country File and The Farmer's Country, obviously, programs about rural life, the countryside and farmers. Although Farmer's Country, the BBC Two one, a few days ago, I don't know if you saw it or not, but the whole episode was devoted to the Lambeth Country Show. So it was lovely to see familiar sights around the Lambeth Country Show in Brockwell Park. But I've kind of become a little bit addicted to Country File and also to the Farmer's Country. Partly it's a bit of escapism, I guess, because it takes you out of the city and into the countryside, and just some wonderful shots and stories and things like that. But also at a more personal level, it's taken me back to my roots, to where I kind of come from, and who, without wishing to sound too dramatic, who I am, the story that kind of shaped my life. I grew up, I'm sure most of you know, I grew up in rural Suffolk, in the country, little small. We maintain to this day that it's a town, but lots of people perhaps would call it a large village, but a little town called Bungay. But it's surrounded by rural East Anglia, rural Suffolk, rural Norfolk. It's right on the Norfolk-Suffolk border. The River Waveney runs through it. And so part of all of my childhood, all of my growing up was shaped by growing up in a rural context. So we didn't have a farm, but I had friends who were sons of farmers, daughters of farmers who grew up on farms. We had friends who obviously had their farms. And so it was a regular part of my world to go onto a working farm, to wander around barns and to see cows brought in, to help bring cows in for milking, to go into dairy parlours and things like that, to go and collect eggs, and just simple things like, I can't remember the last time I wore a pair of wellies. It was probably, oh goodness knows, a long, long time ago. And yet, even something as simple like as a young boy wearing wellies, I just wore them all the time because that's where we always went. It was always mud everywhere and cowpats everywhere and things that used to mess about doing that kind of stuff. And so it's been really interesting for me to kind of go back to my roots and to think about that. In fact, I used to have a pony. Interesting. Don't know if any of you knew that at all, but for 2 or 3 years I had my own horse. I used to do quite a lot of horse riding, so not quite starting to get into the whole gymkhana scene, and on the verge of going, here you go, controversially, fox hunting. Didn't quite manage to get to those dizzy heights of fox hunting. I gave up around about 12, 13, I think I stopped riding. But the next stage would have been sort of regular competing at gymkhanas, sort of little mini show jumping, and fox hunting and all the traditions that went with fox hunting. So every Boxing Day in our little town, the hunt would come through and all the hounds, and this was all pre the restrictions on fox hunting. So it was for real. A real fox would be chased and killed, and that was an acceptable part of my existence. Would sometimes go out beating, not beating people out, beating as in people go shooting pheasants and things like that, and so we would go beating and drive the pheasants out of some wood so that the shooters can shoot them. And so my attitude to animals is kind of a bit shaped by that. So used to having an animal is an animal, a working dog is a working dog, and not at all sentimental about those things, and the robustness and the reality of living in a rural environment. And in fact, my family on my father's side were all farmers as well. So most summers for 3 or 4 or 5 years of my childhood, we would go up to Blackpool, where my great uncles on my dad's side. So it was my dad's mum. She was one of 5, 6, and all her brothers were farmers. So Uncle Tom, Uncle George, Uncle Bob. Who else was there? And they all farmed around the same area. They all had their own farms, but all would help each other out. So we would go up for the summer for 2 or 3 weeks in the summer, and I just have a most amazing time on the farm. So my sister and I would get up and in the morning go feed the pigs or collect the eggs. We would be there when calves were born, and in fact, there's a famous story when a cow gave birth to a calf out in a field away from the farm, and so the calf wasn't well, had to be brought in, and they're heavy to carry. So my Uncle Tom, great Uncle Tom, these are my great uncles, my dad's uncles, got the tractor out with a front loader, took it out to the field. It was a couple of fields away from where the farm was, and loaded the calf into the front trailer. And I would have probably been about 9 years old, and there's a picture of me sitting on the calf in the front loader as it came bouncing back over the fields to bring this calf in, so that it could be looked after and cared for. Sheep dipping, times we'd go sheep dip. If you've never seen sheep dipping, where they shove them under in the sheep dip to treat them for viruses and pests and all kinds of stuff that live on sheep. So the sheep would come through. That was another part of the family. It's quite something to see them, and they would use an old-fashioned yard brush, a big old broom, and push it onto the back of their neck, because they had to make sure the whole sheep went under the water full of disinfectant to kill off all the bugs for the health of the sheep. Sheep weren't particularly keen on this, but sheep being sheep, it had to be done. And so that was my upbringing. So it's been really quite nostalgic to be reminded with Countryfile and Matt Baker and all the other presenters and the other show on BBC Two about where I came from, and to sit down with Lydia and Lindsay, but Lydia particularly, and just say, yeah, we used to do that. That was part of my story, part of my where I come from, that shaped who I was. You're wondering when I'm going to get to the Bible. Psalm 145 is one of those places that reminds us where we've come from. So for me to be in a disorientating time in the middle of a city, in the middle of a pandemic, it's a kind of escapism, but it's also a reminder of why I'm the kind of person I am today and the things that have shaped me. To go back to that at a time of disorientation, it's been a reorientation in that sense. It's kind of put me a little bit right way up in a world. It's a familiar world, and so it helps me to settle, I guess. And Psalm 145 for God's people does that. There's one of my favourite theologians, a chap called Walter Brueggemann, who talks about psalms of orientation and psalms of disorientation. So psalms of orientation orientate us, put us the right way up again, put us back into the world as God sees the world. And then the psalms of disorientation, we'll come to that. We'll look at a couple of those that sort of challenge that story that puts us the right way up and says the world isn't the right way up. Why do the righteous suffer? Why is there misery in the world and evil in the world? And why does God seem to have abandoned the world? That's not the world we signed up for. But part of the answer to that disorientation is to go back to that place of orientation that puts us the right way up, to reminds us the story of not me as a country boy and where I've come from, but we as God's people and where we have come from, the story that shapes our lives. And what shapes our lives is beautifully portrayed in this Psalm, Psalm 145, that has been so wonderfully read to us. It's actually an acrostic psalm. An acrostic means that each verse begins with a different letter of the alphabet. So if it was in English, it would be A, B, C, D, E, but it's not. It's in Hebrew, so it's Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dal, Hey. Just a bit my Hebrew. So you can't see it quite as clearly, but each verse begins with the next letter of the alphabet. And acrostic psalms pop up from time to time in the book of Psalms, and there's a kind of an imagery there that from A to Z, from beginning to end, God is present in everything and in all things. There is a completeness there. There's not a letter in the alphabet. There's not a point in that journey from A, B, C, D all the way to Z where God is not. There are no gaps, and so there's a completeness. There's a fullness there. And as we read this psalm, this is God's world. This is our world. This is the world we were born into. This is the world that shapes our life. And the verse that particularly caught my eye, and just by reading it to kind of close, the second half of verse, second half of verse 13. The Lord is faithful in all his words and gracious in all his deeds. This is what shapes us. This is who we are. The Lord upholds all who are falling and raises up all who are bowed down. And the eyes of all look to you. We all look to God, and you give them their food in due season. You open your hand, satisfying the desire of every living thing. The Lord is just in all his ways and kind in all his doings. The Lord is near to all who call on him, in truth. The Lord is near to all. This is our story. This is nearly burst into that song. This is our story. This is our song, praising our Saviour all the day long. Psalm 145. Spend time in this psalm. Read the verses of this psalm. This will take you back to who you truly are, who we truly are as God's people. And this will orientate us in a time of disorientation and of confusion, where the world seems to have gone all over the place, to remind ourselves of where we have come from and where we are going. May the Lord richly bless your day, and may you speak of him always. Amen.